Welcome to the Best Mom Product Show, where mompreneurs share their adventures in business. I'm your host, Rachel Olson. Today I'm chatting with Emma Weisberg, the founder and CEO of Blink Buggy. Blink Buggy is reinventing the baby book for today's parents by taking the spirit of the traditional baby book and combining it with the power of the internet. Emma is an ex-Googler where she was in strategic sales and marketing for the last 7 years. Today we're going to learn how she took her passion, turned it into a business, just closed funding on a friends and family round, yay, and making it all work while raising a family in New York City. Welcome, Emma. Let's get started.
Rachel, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to see you. So I want to talk to you a little bit about, obviously the business, but before we dive into all of that, can you share with us, you have a daughter, Ciela, and a son, Micah. Can you talk to us about what their ages are and how you kind of have managed that process, because you're still working full-time at Google and you've been building this for the last few years?
Yep, that's right. So my daughter, Ciela, she's 4, and my son, Micah, is 2. They keep us very busy, and I would say that our day starts around 5:30 a.m. usually, when Ciela, the 4-year-old, decides she's going to pretend to start waiting till the time when she's actually supposed to wake up. And she spends the whole hour from when she gets up to when she's supposed to get up, waking me up every 5 minutes to tell me little things like, "Mommy, the sun's not up yet." That's how we spend the first part of the day, and then have a crazy hour and a half rush madness to eat breakfast, brush our teeth, get dressed, pack lunches, etc., and head out to school around 8:30 a.m. So by that point, I feel like I've had a full day.
Right.
And that's when I hop on the subway and head down to work. So I would say the last few years have been very busy with 2 jobs, essentially, my full-time work at Google, and then for the last 2.5 years, a pretty consistent focus on Blink Buggy, and then, of course, 2 children over the course of the last 4 years as well. The one thing that's really kind of kept me together has been the idea of slices of life, so just thinking about what you're doing in the moment. I was lucky enough to actually listen to a talk once from a female executive at Coca-Cola, and she was talking about work-life balance and talked about this idea of slices of life. No matter how thin the slice is, even if it's 5 minutes to make a call to your kid's school or the doctor, or it's an hour, you're in a meeting for work, whatever it is, just being 100% present for that event in that moment. And so that's really the approach I've taken. When I get home from work, it's put the phone away no matter what craziness is going on, be only with my children during that time. I mean, of course, I break my own rules, but that's the idea.
How did you come up with this idea? What was your aha moment? And talk a little bit about how you decided to go for it.
So the idea all came out of the birth of my daughter 4 years ago. So when she was born, I knew that I would want to sort of write to her throughout her life and be able to find a way to express myself and my feelings that she would later be able to, to experience and read. So what I did was, being a good Googler, I started a Gmail account for her in her name, and I sent it around to my close friends and family and said, I'll be writing to Ciela here throughout her life, and if you have special times, moments, memories, photos, etc. that you want to share with her, then please do so. Then I was also always thinking about, how will she consume this 20 years from now? So I would make it very keyword based, and let's say it was a milestone. So her walking for the first time. The title, the top beginning of the actual entry, I would write, milestone, walking, first, thinking about what will she search on in 20 years to find this different type of information. And then, of course, link to the album with the photos from that event or the video from that event, and then share it with the people who I thought would be interested in that moment. And at the time I was on maternity leave, so I was meeting tons and tons of new moms. And this would come up and I would mention it. And I think the aha moment for me was when sort of the 5th or 6th person in a row, new mom, said verbatim the same exact response to me. When I would tell them I did this, they would say, oh my God, that is the best idea I've ever heard. And then they'd pause and say, do you mind if I do it? And to me, this was that was the real aha. Because I kind of thought, well, it's a good idea. It's not the best idea in the world, but also that sort of asking for permission to do something that was, you know, essentially a free public email account.
Right. Okay, go on.
Yeah, no, it all just sort of started clicking in my head that there was a market for this. New moms like myself were feeling a need, and there wasn't a great solution. And even though I liked using Gmail, it wasn't perfect and it wasn't answering all of my needs. So I kind of figured, hey, why don't I try to build the product that I wish I had and that these other new moms wish they had.
Okay, so how do you actually go about doing that?
I come from a bit of a market research background, so my instinct was first survey. So let's prove that there is a market there. So really the first step for me was extensive research into the space, you know, who else was playing in the space, how big was it, and more importantly, writing and sending out surveys to get real parents' input around how are they capturing their memories today, what are they missing, what would they like about a service like this, etc. So really the validation was the first step. Once I got all that information back and it did sort of validate, you know, my thinking, then I felt pretty confident about trying to take it to the next step. But that was also just sort of continued research, talking to every person I knew or could get my hands on who had some expertise in the different areas that I would, you know, eventually need to tap into.
Yeah, I have a question for you there, because I know a lot of people go through the same process when they have an idea. How many people did you reach out to? Can you share that?
Sure. The actual survey, the initial survey that I sent out had I think it was 115 responses. So not tremendous, but to me, the consistency within that set of responses that were also consistent with what my thinking was, you know, being the target consumer myself,
right,
and all of that supporting my hypotheses, I felt was substantial.
Great. Okay. So then on the tech side of things, this is not, we talked about previously, it's not a patentable technology. So how do you go about piecing all of these pieces together to make what you want?
Imagining in your wildest dreams, the product that I wish that I had and all the features and functionalities. And I did really start with that Gmail use case and put down on paper, what do I like about this? What is missing? What do I not like about this? And started building from there. I mean, of course, I'm not a graphic designer. So it was also finding someone who could translate my vision, you know, sort of more into reality.
Right.
So finding the right people and the right partners, both from the design and development side, of course, was key.
How would you say that process took from when you identified the right design and technology person to actually having a product that you could use?
10 months.
Okay.
Months. So that's, I mean, a little misleading because I thought I had to sort of identify the right people one time. I did a whole development process that I ultimately scrapped completely. So that in and of itself was also about 10 months. Started over. And the second time, I had found the right people, and we went from, you know, sort of beginning to live launch of our alpha product, if you want to call it that, in another 10 months.
Okay, so let's talk about your first development, because I know this happens to a lot of people. The first development team doesn't work out. What would you attribute that to? What questions do you wish maybe you would have asked, or what advice do you wish somebody would have told you in the beginning of that process?
There were a few issues. I would say probably in order of importance was the first, I didn't really understand the online sort of startup scene. So there is this whole community here in New York, obviously in several different cities, and they tend to follow a certain process and certain rules and guidelines. And most people, for example, develop in Ruby on Rails or in PHP, in certain programming languages. I didn't know any of that, and ended up developing in Java, which there's nothing wrong with Java. But then if you want to find more talented developers down the road, it's going to be harder. And if you want to get funded, most of the people who are funding these companies will look at that and say, oh, that seems a little strange. So not really understanding the startup marketplace. I sort of thought I understood the moms, which I probably did, but not the online startup world. So that was first and foremost. After that was that I tried to put together a team that was distributed. So the developers were in South America. The designer was in Atlanta and I was in New York, and none of us had worked together as a team before.
Okay.
So very difficult to bring, disparate parties who have never worked together all around the same vision and execute efficiently. Right. So it ended up being something that I just really wasn't. Everyone did their own piece well, but the final product I was not satisfied with.
Okay. And then you decided at that point to scrap it and start over?
Yeah, but I think the one thing before scrapping it, I got one great piece of advice from a sort of mentor here in the city who said, just get 10 people, get 10 of your friends to go on, try it out, and give you feedback. And at the very least, you built this thing, you need some feedback from it. And I was literally about to just throw it out the window without doing any testing of it. And that was really great advice because I got a lot of insights out of that helped to form the next round of development.
It's quite a process, it sounds like. Recently funded $500,000 friends and family round. Could you take us through that process? And I want to start with a few questions. I guess the first one is, did you know how much you wanted to raise? And then, and how did you decide who to approach and your comfort level with that?
Absolutely. So this was such an interesting process. Totally new to me and really eye-opening. We started in early July of this year, and we just closed last week.
Yay.
Yay.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yes, it's a huge accomplishment and what allowed me to sort of finally walk away from my day job and focus on Blink Buggy 100%, which is a wonderful feeling. So to address your first question around how did we decide how much we needed to raise, I knew that I wanted to raise enough to go at least a full year at full capacity without having to raise another round, right, within that time, and assume that there was no revenue coming in during that year. I had a pretty good sense of what our burn rate was. We'd had, an early sense. We'd been live for a few months at that point, and I had been developing for over a year at that point. So I did have a relatively good sense. So, I did the numbers, I did the operating model, and got to a place where I said 500 is sort of our stretch goal. If we can get to 250, we'll be able to meet our immediate development goals, but wouldn't be able to put as much behind it in terms of horsepower behind marketing, PR, etc. Thankfully, we hit the stretch goal because, as most things go, they end up being more expensive than you expect. So I don't think the 250 would have actually done what I had hoped it would have done. That said, based on the operating model and the plan and everything I knew about our burn rate to date was how I chose the 500 number. And then the very interesting part is how to approach friends and family. So this had actually not even occurred to me, and I was thinking, you go to angel investors, you go, seed investors, what have you. And I had a meeting with a woman who's an angel investor out in California, and she looked at me and said, you're crazy if you don't try to do a friends and family round first. She said, I know that it's more common out here on the West Coast, and it's a little less common on the East Coast, so you might feel really uncomfortable about it. She goes, but what's going to happen is you feel awkward about reaching out to your friends. But then if you don't, later on, someone's going to end up being mad at you that you didn't ask them to be a part of the opportunity. I said, all right, that's a good way of thinking about it. And, from there, she really inspired me to give it a shot. And what I found at the end, 3.5 months later with our funding closed, the majority of people who were involved aren't actually my immediate friends and family. There are some of those, but for the most part, it was them connecting me on to people who they thought might be a good fit or interested. And then it sort of, blossoms out from there. And it really an experience that was so life-changing, and I didn't know what to expect, but you think this is crazy and it's embarrassing to go ask your friend for money. But then when they see how passionate you are and how much you believe in it, it sort of really inspires them to want to be involved with, or to help you find the right people to be involved.
What materials do you need to have ready to go and ask a friend or family to fund you?
So on the materials side, I had a full investor pitch deck, so about the sort of standard 10-slide pitch deck, which included some basic financials, the sort of snapshots of our operating plan. But I did also have a very full operating plan that, had somebody wanted to walk through in more detail and see that, we would be able to do that as well. I also had a one-page description of what a convertible debt note is, with actual examples, because we decided to raise using a convertible debt note, which was something I personally had never heard of before. So I couldn't assume that my friends and family outside of the startup world would know what that is or be comfortable with it. So that was actually more important probably than the pitch deck. Having that very clear one-page example. What does this mean? How would your money be used? How will it convert? And some example numbers of what would happen in different scenarios. That I would always pre-send so people had time to read it and then ask me questions. I would bring the deck with me or over the phone or video conference and send the deck afterwards. But for the most part, people had more questions about the convertible debt note itself and how that works, as opposed to how big is the market for Blink Buggy? Who's your competition? They kind of, got that or accepted my word on that.
Can you explain from what you've learned to, in layman's term, what a convertible debt note is and give an example of that?
Basically, because you're such an early stage company, it's very hard to put a value on the company today. So it's hard to say, I want X percent of the company, or I'm giving X percent equity to you for an investment of Y dollars, because it's just too early and no one knows what's going to happen. So it's in no one's best interest to try to come up with a number right now. So what the convertible debt note is, it's almost sort of a down payment on the equity you could have in the next round. So you give a loan essentially now that converts into equity when you have a follow-on, either a funding or you're being acquired, a next round that puts a real valuation on the company. So the assumption is at that point, you'll be in a place where you can make a solid valuation, and the people coming in the convertible debt round will actually get some benefits for coming in early and be treated as people who took a greater risk, and they'll most likely get some sort of discount off of what they're purchasing in the next round. But it allows them to sort of stay safe in the beginning and get a benefit upon conversion.
Okay, so then do they get their money back when you get, a round A or the next round of funding, or it's up to them to keep their money in?
So people can structure it in different ways, but the most common is that the money stays in. It converts into a number of shares in that round,
okay,
but at a greater number of shares in that round than they would have if they came in at that point.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, thank you for explaining that. Now that you have funding, do you feel a major pressure to, of course you want to succeed, but do you feel like a stronger weight on your shoulders because of this, or do you feel just excited to be able to move forward?
I feel a greater level of accountability, in a good way. So I feel relieved that I know we can move forward, but now it's very real. It's not just my money. And losing my money would be bad, but okay, I only have to answer to myself.
Right.
Now I feel that really, other people's money, great accountability, but it's a real motivator.
When you were learning about raising from friends and families, did you learn that it takes, 3.5 months, or is it just different for everybody? Do you put an end date on that?
from everyone I've spoken to, it is different for everyone, but the sort of 3 to 6 month time frame is pretty standard. I didn't. I tried to put September, end of September, as the end date, but it did, sort of carry on a little past that, obviously, and ultimately made the end date kind of when we hit the amount that we were looking to get. I wouldn't have wanted to let it trickle on forever, but I think what you do is put an end date so you have something to work against. But if you're not quite there at that point,
Right.
don't give up.
How are you getting the word out there to other moms about this? And, you have a strong marketing and sales background. What are you bringing in from, your previous roles that you feel like will help you with Blink Buggy?
The area that we started with is actually the mommy blogs, the mommy bloggers. This, obviously, you're reaching your target audience. And going through a spokesperson who they know and whom they trust. Seeing conversion rates from working with the mommy bloggers anywhere from 25 to 60% conversion rates, which is astronomical, right?
Yeah, that's incredible.
Incredible. And then luckily I realized that, and I don't expect other media to perform the same way. So we see that this is a great avenue and very efficient. But again, it's highly targeted, direct response. We have a very clear goal. We want registrations, but it's lower volume. So, you're working through individual mom bloggers who have a certain subset audience. When you get to more broadcast, we understand that that'll be the stage where we're more interested in volume and awareness. And have a little bit more money to spend and don't have to be as conscious about the ROI.
What are your steps in going to these mom blogs? Did you go through a company that has access to thousands of mom blogs? How did you go through that process to figure out who was going to be the right way to test your product? I
started by reaching out directly. So I did a little PR training course to sort of PR in a box and teach myself.
Good for you.
How to be effective and what to look for and what to say and how to structure your outreach, and started with reaching out directly to different mom bloggers who had either been recommended to me or who I had found in my research. I also started local. I think nothing replaces that face-to-face, and if you can get somebody to sit down with you for a coffee, that's going to be, your best bet. It's a much harder sell, but obviously goes a lot further. So I started with New York. Did a ton of outreach. The conversion rate on that was much, much lower. But I did get a really wonderful mommy blogger in New York to meet up with me. Her name's Alana, and she runs Mommy Shorts. And we had struck up a bit of a relationship and a partnership, which has been wonderful. So then rather than going to some of the networks that connect mom bloggers, I've been able to work with her in a more sort of intimate fashion. She knows the community, understands my product, and helps me to connect to other bloggers who she feels would be the right fit for Blink Buggy.
Okay, great. And then what do you do in return?
So these are sponsored posts.
Okay.
And the way that we do it is that the blogger themselves spend some time with the product. So just like you did, sign up, play around, get a feel for it. But then they actually put their own content up there. And ultimately, the review that they write, of course, is their own opinion. I don't see it before it's posted. I have no influence over what they write, but I give them a certain fee for the time that they've spent investing in using the product, putting their content up there, and then ultimately sharing that out with their audience.
For the mom entrepreneur out there that's listening, what tips do you have from a marketing perspective of what are some really cost-effective marketing tips that you could provide?
The real biggest tip is understanding your own goal. So you really have to stay 100% focused on, for me at this point, registrations, right? It's so easy to get caught up in wanting to have other things happen, virality, how many Facebook likes, people sharing on. But ultimately, you have to pick one and just go with it. And put all your power behind that one. Sort of beyond that, I would say that the two things that I've either experienced myself or heard from other entrepreneurs in a similar space have been very effective are obviously the bloggers, like I just talked about. On the Facebook side, if you have a mobile application, the Facebook mobile ads are actually very efficient for mobile app downloads.
Oh, interesting.
So they allow you to reach only the people who are accessing Facebook via their mobile phone. So you know that there's no waste.
Thank you, Emma. This has been great. I want to wrap up, with some of your favorites. So I want to ask you, what is your favorite book or most effective book?
My favorite book is called Passionate Minds.
Okay.
Yep, by David Bodanis. It's a really great story about woman scientists back in the time of the Enlightenment, when you would never have heard of her, of course, because she was a woman at that time.
What about you? Have a favorite app that you're using right now?
My favorite app is called Easy Voice Recorder, and it's a voice recording app that I use whenever we're driving in the car with the kids. Because they're so funny sitting in the back seat and capturing little snippets of them singing or chatting with each other. And they don't realize that I'm doing it because I'm sort of
right.
in front. They can't see it. It's the best.
That is awesome. I'm going to have to download that. I find the conversations between my two daughters are hysterical or like sweet and yes. Yeah. What a great idea. Look at you.
When they're not seeing you.
Right. Oh, exactly. Oh, that's awesome. I want to thank you for sharing. For our viewers and listeners, I'll include all of the items mentioned in this interview in our show notes. I'd love to hear your feedback. You can shoot me an email at Rachel, Rachel, at bestmomproducts.com and share your opinion. If you enjoyed our show, please share your comments on our website at bestmomproducts.com. You can sign up for our newsletter while you're there and keep up to date on the latest and greatest interviews and tips from experts and entrepreneurs. So thank you for listening.